Some free market economists are always teasing me, saying my ideas of government intervention are from the age of dinosaurs, and I didn't know we were going to be getting into how old I was today. But anyways, greetings, good morning, everyone. I do want to thank IPAC for the invitation. I also want to thank IPAC for what you do, which is the work of professional enhancement, professional development, leadership training, policy analysis, and so on, to add value to the work that you do as civil servants here in Ontario. And I am one economist who recognizes that civil servants actually do add value on the value-added side of the ledger, of our economic ledger, as opposed to being a drain, a cost, a waste, which we hear all the time. In fact, public sector jobs, Don's numbers actually showed that, if we went back to that chart, have been one of the most important stabilizing, strengthening forces of our labor market, and that means you and the work you do. And as a taxpayer, rather than an economist, I want to recognize the work that you do and say that your defined benefit pension is 100% justified for the decades that you put in, because you're underpaid relative to your private sector counterparts, contrary to what you hear out there. I also want to congratulate IPAC for including the C word in the title of this series. Imagine that, coming to an event where capitalism is mentioned in the actual title. You know, I actually thought I should probably check under the podium and see if there's one of those black bombs with a fuse on it, because if you use the word capitalism, it obviously implies you're some kind of revolutionary, because you're naming the system and perhaps implying there's an alternative to it, I don't know, rather than assuming it's the natural state of being. In fact, I think the last time I spoke at an event that had capitalism in the title, it was that memorable speech I gave to the International Trotskyist Workers Brigade Committee of the world. It was the puritanical group wing, not the revisionist wing, of course. So, all right, fine. If that's how you're going to be. Juice up the coffee next time, would you there, Jeffrey? Okay. So there's my Twitter handle at the top. If any of you are tweetophiles like me, policyalternatives.ca, that's the website for the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives that I do a lot of work with, that publishes a lot of research on labor market social trends. Progressive-economics.ca is a website for our network of progressive economists in Canada. We can't even have our meetings in a phone booth anymore. There's actually lots of us, and we have a good blog site there. The last one is for my book, economicsforeveryone.ca. Look at the title, the subtitle, A Short Guide to the Economics of the C Word. Again, there you go. And there's a bunch of free materials, including teaching guides, glossaries, for any of you who do any kind of educational work in your own divisions, etc. You might find something of use there. Well, I think I'll be quite complimentary to what we've already heard. We are absolutely wasting the potential of Canadians to produce, with both our bronze and our brain, goods and services that are useful and that enhance our standard of living, that pay our taxes, and that contribute to a stronger society and a stronger environment. There are millions of Canadians unemployed or underemployed. We have more skills than ever. This nonsense that we have a problem in Canada because we don't have enough skills, that is absolute nonsense. If you're an individual, then yeah, you've got a better chance of landing one of the scarce jobs if you've got more skills, because you manage to get closer to the front of the lineup for it. That doesn't mean that we're constrained by a shortage of skills in our economy. To the contrary, even the OECD recognizes the Canadian workforce is the best educated in the world. Over 50% in the working age cohort have post-secondary education, higher than any other advanced country. But those skills that we invested in collectively and individually are being wasted. Our capacity to produce is greater than ever, yet we're constantly being told we have to tighten our belts and give up things that we had decades ago, as if it was some preordained economic fact that we can't do anything about. Give Canadians a chance to work, give us jobs, more of them in the quantity sense, and better jobs in the quality sense, and we will absolutely create a better society, and pay our taxes in the course of it. I'm always intrigued by the arguments I hear from our political leaders. Mr. Kenney, when he was appointed employment minister, said, "I will work hard to end the paradox of too many people without jobs in an economy that has too many jobs without people." Think about that for a second. There's no problem of the shortage of jobs. We've just got the wrong workers. We're trying to fit square holes into round pegs. No, round pegs into square holes. And I'm going to solve that mismatch problem, is the assumption. Or the argument from our Prime Minister just a couple of weeks ago that our economy is the envy of the entire world. So modesty is obviously not one of his strong suits. The envy of the entire world. Or Mr. Oliver, our finance minister, saying Canada is an international economic success story thanks to our focus on jobs. You notice I chose unflattering pictures of the three of them with their mouths open. That was just, luck of the draw there on Google Image. So let's have a reality check here. Have, in fact, we recovered from the recession? Is our labor market, in fact, the best in the entire world? And are we, in fact, short of workers? Is there, in fact, a problem of finding the right workers, enough of them and with the enough skills or the right attitude or whatever? Well, our unemployment rate has declined, of course. Now, for any of you who work in labor market policy, you know what that means. Here's the guy looking for work. He can't find any work. He gives up. Congratulations. You've just disappeared from the unemployment rolls because you've given up looking for work. And in fact, the decline in labor force participation is a major reason why our official unemployment rate has declined. This is a guy from Statistics Canada, by the way, on the right. I mean, folks, look at the technical detail here. We've spared no expense. You've got the clipboard, you've got a pocket protector there, you've got thick rimmed glasses, you've got a comb over. Okay, I mean, this is as realistic as it gets. The sad thing is, he's the one who lost his job because of cutbacks at Statistics Canada. I prefer, especially in times of economic weakness, to look at the employment rate rather than the unemployment rate, because the employment rate doesn't ask, are you actively seeking work to the satisfaction of the statistician? It just asks if you have a job. Even this doesn't tell the whole story because we're only looking at quantity of work here, not quality of work. So if you're underemployed in a casual part-time position, you still show up as employed here. So this doesn't tell the whole story, but it's better than looking at the unemployment rate. There was our employment rate going along in the kind of 63 to 64 range until the recession hit, peaked in February of 2008. Then it fell dramatically in those frightening months of the Great Recession, the collapse of Lehman Brothers and so on. It fell by 2.5% of the working age population. That was the steepest decline in employment since the Great Depression. We hit bottom there thanks to some of the active stimulus measures and other things. And for a couple of years, as Dawn pointed out in her presentation, for a couple of years, 2010, 2011, we actually bounced back a little bit. But then, since about 2012, we've gone nowhere. Canada's economy has been absolutely stuck in the mud for at least 2 years, a little bit more. And in fact, the employment rate is now declining. And as of now, I will confess, the labor market report came out on Friday, and normally I procrastinate and do my presentation one day before I speak. This time, Jeffrey was on my case, so I did my presentation 5 days before I speak. So that number does not include Friday's report, so there's a bit of a bounce on that. But until Thursday last week, when I proactively finished my presentation, our employment rate was back to the lowest point of the worst days of the recession, which is hardly anything to boast about. And if we got our employment rate back up to where it was before the recession, there'd be about 750,000 more jobs in Canada's economy. Now, Donna is quite correct. There's a demographic angle to the story, but even adjusting for the demographics, participation has fallen for those in the core age cohort. And remember, the overall participation rate is lifted by the tremendous increase in labor force participation by those over 65, who in many cases are working because they feel compelled to because of the inadequacy of their pension. So there's still a problem, even if we adjust for the demographics. So the storyline that Mr. Harper was mentioning there, that Canada's the best in the world, they're trying to recreate the feeling we had when Canada won the gold medal in hockey in the Olympics, of course, national pride. We beat everyone. The better sports analogy is not the men's hockey team. It is the men's soccer team, which ranked 109th according to the latest FIFA rankings on soccer. That's the men's team. Doug says they're generous. The women's soccer team ranked 6th in the world. Canada's women rank 6th in the world. So I say turn the economy over to the women and they'll do a better job of it, just like they did in soccer. And in fact, the problem with comparing absolute growth rates of employment, and Dawn did a bit of that in her presentation, is there's huge differences between countries in the overall rate of population growth. It's one thing to look at a place like Canada where the population is growing relatively quickly, about 1.5% a year. You have to be creating hundreds of thousands of jobs each year just to keep up with that, to make sure that the overall level of utilization of the labor market is constant, let alone improving. So yes, Canada's up 720,000 or whatever the number is, net jobs, compared to where we were at when the recession hit. But our working age population has grown by 2 million in that period. So the absolute number of jobs can give you a very misleading comparison, especially when you're looking at countries like Germany or Japan where the population is not growing at all, or in Japan's case is even shrinking. They don't have to create any net new jobs to get their labor market back to a position of decent balance between supply and demand. So you have to look at both the absolute amount of job creation and the size of the population in order to come up with a fair international comparison. This chart ranks the 34 countries of the OECD according to the change in the employment rate. So we're measuring the change in employment, but as a proportion of the change in the working age population in each of those countries. And Canada's employment rate is well down below its pre-recession level. In fact, we're about where we were in the worst days of the recession, which is why it still feels like a recession in the labor market. If you're actually out looking for work, you would never know that we were in quote-unquote recovery for over 5 years. For over 5 years, Canada's economy has been in recovery. And I'm starting to think that being in recovery means something different than economists used to say. It used to be real GDP was growing. Now I think being in recovery means you go to a meeting every month and announce, yes, our labor market has a problem. My name is Canada and my labor market has a problem. That's like 5 years of that. The employment rate decline in Canada compared to other countries ranks us 20th out of 34. So that's mediocre at best. In fact, in the lower half of OECD countries, there are places, including Germany, where you really have recovered from the recession, where you can say Germany, Korea, etc., where employment has rebounded sufficiently relative to their population to say that they're back to where they were. And by the way, those countries are getting older too. Getting older is not something that's unique to Canada. The Canada-U.S. comparison, I think, is an important one. We were spared some of the worst fallout from the global financial crisis. We didn't have any banks that collapsed as they did in America. The downturn in employment was not as severe here. So for the first years after the financial crisis, we were kind of patting ourselves on the back, saying in Canada, yes, we are better, we're more moral, we have public health care, and our beer tastes better. And by the way, our economy wasn't as hard hit as it was in America. And that was true for the first few years, but now the Americans are really getting some momentum. They've pursued some very unconventional policies. Quantitative easing, which has pumped trillions of dollars of invented purchasing power into the economy, where our central bank was standing by and saying, no, we're going to follow the traditional rules. Deficits, they said deficits were not the top priority. We'll tolerate deficits for longer if it helps Americans get back to work. Here in Canada, we said, no, deficits are the top priority, and we are going to be the first major industrialized economy to eliminate the deficit this year at the federal level. But on the jobs front, employment, production, all of that has actually hurt us. The Americans have created over 2.3 million full-time jobs. Until Friday, Canada had created 15,000 full-time jobs. But now with that big number on Friday, I get whiplash. I don't know about you, Don. I got to make a monthly chiropractor appointment to get my neck straightened after each month's report. So that distinction between an American economy that's really gathered momentum and ours, which has been stuck in the mud for a couple of years, is going to become more of an issue. I think our true unemployment, not just the official rate, but when you add in the decline in participation, involuntary part-time work, and other pools of hidden unemployment, our true unemployment rate is around 12% of the labor force adjusted, as opposed to the official 6.8%. So we have a major problem on the quantity side. On the skills side, as I mentioned, Canadian workers are, by some measures, the best skilled, certainly among the best skilled of any in the world. Millions of Canadians, you've heard of the PhDs driving taxi and so on. Now the PhDs aren't even driving taxi. Now the PhDs are doing that online thing, Andrew. What the hell is that called? Uber. In unlicensed cabs. And this is the brave new economy. Wow. Anyways, the vacancy data shows that the number of positions actually going unfilled because the employer can't find someone who can do it is minimal. In a labor force of 18 million, there are 200,000 vacancies, and most of those have nothing to do with skills. In fact, the industry with the highest vacancy rate is not engineering or computer science, it's food service. Food service and hospitality has the highest vacancy rate, and guess what? It isn't a lack of skills that's keeping those jobs open. It's a lack of decent wages, I would say. What is a good job? Doug kind of did this in the first bit of the introduction, so thank you for that. I think we could identify all of the characteristics that we would rightfully associate with a good job. I think there's something deeper behind it. I think of it as a job that treats the worker as a human being rather than as a productive input to be organized in just-in-time fashion and minimized and tossed aside when it's no longer needed. And that's where labor is not just another commodity. When we invest in labor and value labor, we're investing and valuing in our society. There's a problem of both quantity of jobs, as I mentioned, but also the quality of job has deteriorated with all of the well-known trends towards precarious work that my fellow panelists and others have been addressing. We have to address both sides of that. And in fact, I think there's a bit of an interaction between the quantity and the quality sides. If you start out with some kind of weak position in the labor market and a shortage of jobs, well, then you obviously have more desperation on the part of workers to accept any position, including very subpar, precarious positions with inadequate or unpredictable hours. Well, what happens is once you've created a pool of people who are willing to do that kind of work, employers adjust their business models accordingly to take advantage of the fact that, you know what, I don't have to offer anyone a permanent job. I can do it on a rotating shift schedule. I can bring in people only when I need them, make no promises, and still run my company. And if you can do that, then you're going to say, why bother taking on someone? Why bother with the risk and expense and commitment of taking on someone permanent? So you get a new business model. You even get new infrastructure to support that business model. Everything from the employment agencies, which are ubiquitous now, to things like software, new software programs that allow restaurant owners to maximize their shift scheduling or optimize their shift scheduling, taking advantage of the fact that they can always find someone to come in even for a couple of hours of work. And that reinforces the pool of vulnerable workers as a permanent feature of our economy, which means companies are even less willing to create permanent jobs. So it becomes a bit of a self-reinforcing cycle, this link between the quantity and the quality, and why I think we need to address both sides of it. Again, Andrew was mentioning the demand side of the labor market. We need to emphasize job creation, not deficit reduction. We need to invest huge in public infrastructure. Private companies are not investing enough. They're sitting on much of their money, so we need governments who can borrow at zero in real interest rate terms to invest in stuff that we need, both for the jobs that are created and for the benefits of that infrastructure down the road. On improving the quality, then of course I'm with Leah on employment standards, including minimum wages, putting some limits on how employment agencies exploit that pool. It's absolutely immoral. On top of it being inefficient economically, it's absolutely immoral that a desperate worker is actually doing work that the company's paying $18 an hour for, but they're only getting $12 an hour for because the agency's creaming off the rest. We need some limits on that. We need a genuine youth employment strategy. We have no strategy. Even when I was a kid, I don't know, when was that, Doug? Apparently 1923. You could go down to the manpower office, as it was called, or the EI office, and there'd be a whole catalog of jobs. You know, I was trying to help my kid find a summer job last year, and I was shocked to see you can't even do that anymore. There's no such thing anymore. That's how bad our labor market information system is. We really do toss people to the wind. So we, through the Unifor, we've been trying to focus on this good jobs discussion, not just from the union perspective, but more broadly. We had a good jobs summit the weekend before last here in Toronto with business, government, labor, post-secondary institutions all coming together to try and show that good jobs has to be a social priority for all stakeholders, and the status quo situation is not inevitable. If you do a fair comparison internationally, there are other labor markets that are doing a better job than Canada, a much better job. It is absolutely false to say that we are the envy of the whole world, both on the quantity of jobs, the quality of the jobs, and the equality of access to those jobs. And that, plus the double dose of trade union Prozac that I take with my orange juice every morning, is what keeps me going. So thank you for your attention. Okay.